Last slide was covered in the previous part of this video. Next slide, this goes over the fact that recessive genetic disorders occur at a higher frequency than those that are caused by dominant alleles. And that is oftentimes because in some cases, when an individual inherit or happens to be homozygous dominant, then it can become a lethal condition, meaning that they may not live beyond their fetal state. Okay, so in those cases, in the cases where the disorders are inherited in a dominant manner, those conditions would allow the individual to be born only if they're heterozygous or if they are homozygous recessive. Okay, and for this reason, oftentimes many of the genetic disorders that we see more commonly are where the individual has the disorder if they get 2 copies of the diseased gene. Okay, in other words, that allele that's diseased is recessive. Now, incomplete dominance. Okay, incomplete dominance. Last time we talked about codominance in ABO blood typing. Okay. Incomplete dominance is a little different. Let me explain. So, incomplete dominance is when if you cross the 2 true breeding parents, the offspring will exhibit a phenotype that is in between the 2 parents. Okay, so in this case, we have a parent with red flower crossed with a yellow. Oh my God, what am I talking about? A parent that's red flower with one parent that's white flower crossed to result in F1 generation that has pink flower, and this pink is an in-between color between red and white. And notice that the symbols we use to denote these incomplete dominance alleles, right? Because if we're to use big R, small r, that would indicate that the red is dominant over white. But that is not the case here, since both of these will be in some way manifested in the offspring. So we use the C to denote that this is the case of incomplete dominance. Okay. This is similar to the use of IA, IB, and small I in ABO genetics or blood typing genetics. Okay, so now if we're to cross 2 F1 generations, okay, we see that following the Mendelian pattern of inheritance, there's a 1 to 2 to 1 distribution in the phenotypes in the offspring. Okay. Well, looking at the color, okay, looking at the phenotype with your naked eye, this is a case of incomplete dominance because red and white results in an intermediate state. But if you look at it molecularly, perhaps that what happened here is this flower is exhibiting both the red pigment as well as the white pigment. At a molecular level, it can seem like it's a case of codominance rather than incomplete dominance. So the question of whether this is codominance or incomplete dominance oftentimes depends directly on the level of your investigation. Are we looking at it with our naked eye or are we looking at it under the microscope? Okay. Sickle cell anemia, sickle cell gene. This is another case that illustrates this concept that codominance and incomplete dominance are not necessarily mutually exclusive of one another. In sickle cell anemia, okay, so normal people have this hemoglobin gene. Hemoglobin is the protein that allows your red blood cells to carry oxygen. So I found this web image. And most of us who don't have sickle cell conditions, okay, we have normal hemoglobin. That's hemoglobin A. That's the allele, HbA. So we have 2 copies of normal allele. So our red blood cells never sickle. And then there are individuals that are heterozygous at this locus. And for these, in this condition, this is known as sickle cell trait. So these people don't have sickle cell anemia. They don't have sickle cell disease, but they have sickle cell trait. Generally, under most conditions, they do not experience anemia. But if their body were to be exposed to particularly stressful conditions, like if they were to rise to a high altitude, climb Mount Everest, okay, that would be a case where they're more prone to have their red blood cells sickle in those conditions than a normal person. So there's still some phenotypic difference between them and a normal homozygous A allele person. Okay, but their anemia wouldn't be quite as severe as someone with sickle cell disease. Okay, in sickle cell disease, the person is homozygous for the sickle cell allele. Okay, and they only have the sickle cell hemoglobin. So it's the abnormal hemoglobin that causes the red blood cells to form a sickle shape. Okay, these patients, you don't need to expose their body to particularly stressful condition before they start forming sickle cell. So their red blood cells will just naturally become sickled, and that leads to your body trying to clear all those sickle red blood cells. And when your body clears all those sickle red blood cells, it becomes anemic because now you're lacking red blood cells. Okay. So in these people with sickle cell trait, we see that they have both normal hemoglobin as well as abnormal hemoglobin present in your red blood cells. Because both are present, so we're looking at in terms of hemoglobin, okay, what type of hemoglobin level are present, what type of hemoglobins are present, then this will be a case of codominance, okay, because in these heterozygous individuals, they have both the sickle cell allele as well as the normal allele, leading to both types of hemoglobin being present. Okay. In regards to a blood cell shape, okay, there is a incomplete dominance, meaning that these individuals who are heterozygous, their cells would not sickle as badly as those with sickle cell disease. Okay, those who are homozygous for the sickle cell allele. Okay, and so this goes to emphasize this statement of that whether something is codominant or incomplete dominant oftentimes relies directly on the level of our investigation. Okay, now let's talk about the concept of multiple allele inheritance. Last time we discussed what codominance is. And so multiple allele inheritance is when there are more than one alleles present at a single gene. Okay, so in the case of ABO blood groups, right, at the single gene, the allele could be IA, IB, or I. Okay, as opposed to just two possibilities. Sex-linked inheritance is where the gene of interest is carried on a sex chromosome. Okay, it could be the Y chromosome or the X chromosome. Okay, and later we'll look at genetic problems involving sex-linked inheritance. So the X and Y chromosomes are homologous in a very specific regions on each chromosome. Okay. But there are a lot of genes on the X chromosome that are not present on the Y chromosome. So these are not exactly considered to be homologs. Okay. If you're a female, your X chromosome will be homologous with your other X chromosome. So a form of sex-linked inheritance is X-linked inheritance. We don't really talk about Y-linked inheritance just because there are so few genes that are carried on the Y chromosome. Okay, when we talk about sex-linked inheritance, 90% of the time we're talking about X-linked inheritance. Okay, an example of X-linked inheritance is a form of red-green color blindness, in which the individual has a hard time differentiating red from green. Okay, and this, interestingly enough, this is actually a type of color blindness that's a lot more prevalent in male, and there's a good reason why. Okay, so because this allele is inherited in an X-linked recessive pattern, that means that essentially you if you're a female, okay, then you would need both of your X chromosomes to have that allele in order for you to receive this kind of color blindness. Whereas if you're a male, you really only need one copy of it to affect you, because your other copy isn't going to be an X chromosome, right? You're going to inherit a Y chromosome from dad, and then if you inherit a diseased allele from your mom, then you are going to be afflicted with the condition. So go over this Punnett square table to make sure you understand this this concept. Okay, and make sure you understand why this is more prevalent in males compared to females. Okay, and that's generally going to be a case for X-linked recessive inheritance. Okay, so this slide goes over that concept. Please go over this on your own and let me know if you have questions. Now, polygenic inheritance. Polygenic inheritance is a condition where multiple genes contribute to a specific trait. Okay, so the example shown here is skin color. Okay, there are multiple genes that are involved in determining the offspring's skin color. Okay. And that means, given the SEM2 parent, you can have siblings whose skin color are significantly different from one another. Okay. Pleiotropy is sort of the opposite of polygenic inheritance. So polygenic inheritance is where multiple genes determine a single trait. Pleiotropy is where a single gene affects multiple aspects of a phenotype. The example given here is, again, this sickle cell gene. So the sickle cell anemia and the globin gene can have multiple implications. Okay. It can cause sickling of the red blood cells, and that can, on the long term, manifest as poor physique, musculoskeletal abnormality, can manifest as heart failure. As you can see, this single mutation in a single gene can lead to a wide range of symptoms. Okay, so this is pleiotropy. For patterns of inheritance in various diseases, there's a list of conditions that are, oh my god, they are inherited in autosomal dominant pattern, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, and X-linked recessive patterns. This is a table that I had in another class students memorize these, but for this class, you are not responsible for actually knowing any of these conditions. Okay, on a test, if I were to use the name of any of these conditions, I would let you know whether they are inherited in an autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, or X-linked recessive pattern. So I'm going to skip these slides. And you can skip that last page of your lecture note as well, because it's just about details of each of these conditions, which you don't have to know. So I'll talk separately about practice genetics questions.